From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Wednesday in July. We are a week deep into Ravens training camp, and we have plenty more to go. We are going to discuss what we've seen from the Ravens at training camp so far. We'll also talk about sour note to the end of practice yesterday. That is the Isaiah likely injury, what it means for the Ravens going forward. And we'll talk about how Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton intend to change the culture of this Ravens defense. First, Jonas, though, I got to ask, how often do you use the phrase "sock it to me" in daily life?
Ironically or unironically?
Ironically counts too.
Almost never.
How about ironic? Even ironically?
No.
You just don't use "sock it to me"?
No.
I feel like it's a phrase we got to bring back.
Well, I think I would only use it conjoined with the word baby at the end. Sock it to me, baby.
I heard it in an Otis Redding song, and I thought that's a phrase we really got to bring back. Sock it to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So anytime
do you think it's more likely in your Orioles verbiage or Ravens verbiage?
I think it could be used in any verbiage. I think anytime that I'm giving out a great take on this podcast,
you're at the Olive Garden, you want another round of breadsticks. Sock it to me, baby.
I don't say baby. I wouldn't say baby to a waiter or waitress.
What's wrong with baby?
Because I don't know the waiter or waitress. Maybe if I knew somebody at the table, they suggested, "Hey,"
okay. Yeah,
and I'd say,
"Sock it to me." You're there with a loved one. He or she has the breadstick, and you say,
"Sock it to me, baby." Or if I'm giving out a great take on this podcast, Jonas, you can say, "Sock it to me."
I won't say that.
Okay. We are going to give out some great takes on this podcast. But first, we have to talk about unfortunate news that came from yesterday's practice, and that is that tight end Isaiah likely went down with a foot injury. It happened near the end of, it was 11 on 11s, correct? No, 7 on 7s? Nope, it was individual. Great.
Process of elimination.
Yeah. So this happened right near the end of practice. As John Harbaugh said, better to have happened now, considering it's not even August yet, if it was going to happen at all. But it is unfortunate. It was literally the last rep of the final period of practice. The whistle blew. He was laying on the ground, kind of writhing in pain. You guys were watching from a good ways away. And then I saw him being wheeled off in the cart and walk into the building, putting very little pressure on his left leg. Got a report this morning from Jeremy Fowler of ESPN that he suffered a small foot fracture, and Ian Rappaport reported that the season opener is 6 weeks away, and if all goes well, Isaiah likely should be ready or almost ready by that time. So it seems like the Ravens may have avoided a cataclysmic injury. In July, we're seeing guys around the league go down with season-ending injuries. This is not that. And fortunately, the Ravens appear to have gotten out, not totally unscathed, but gotten out with a minor miracle here.
It's a little bit more serious than just a rolled ankle, which was the initial prognosis from John Harbaugh. Said a couple weeks. They were expecting, and maybe we'll get more good news, more bad news today, because I think they're going in for an MRI. So hopefully we'll know more by like 4 or 5-ish whenever John Harbaugh goes up at the podium and talks to us today. But yeah, I mean, it was just a weird rep. It looked like Isaiah almost kind of forced himself onto the field for that final rep because he was not really winning his one-on-ones, and he just wanted to be, to get in one more win potentially before they broke for practice. But he didn't, lost to Sanusi Kane, or got, tangled up with Sanusi Kane on that final rep, just landed a little awkwardly. So your heart breaks for him. Like you said, this is going to have been a lot worse. And for the team, the Ravens, like, there's no other position. I think probably the Ravens would feel better about being able to withstand an injury to a potential playmaker, because you've got Mark Andrews as that slot potential receiver. You can even move DeAndre Hopkins and play him in the slot. Certainly wouldn't put the fear of the run game that Isaiah likely brings as that open field blocker. But you've got Charlie Kohler, who's made a couple catches. We know about his blocking acumen. And then you've got Pat Ricard as the, quasi fullback, offensive lineman, tight end. So you hope that Isaiah likely, is diligent about his rehab. He's obviously a very hard worker. He spent time this offseason at tight end But I mean, like, it is just kind of interesting. And I think the psychology of this team is probably something that we talk a lot about during the season. But, he is going to want to prove that he deserves a contract. I'm sure we'll talk about there was some smoke that there was a deal imminent. But if there's not, and has this desire to be the best tight end in the NFL, be the best tight end in the room, then does that mean that he is maybe overdoing it with how quickly he gets back to the field, or is patience and caution the watchword, and he's going to take maybe a little bit more time than the Ravens coaches would like because he just wants to be as close to 100% when he gets out there than otherwise. There's just so many little wrinkles that come with this injury. But if the Ravens, obviously that week 1 game is important, you'd like to be full strength. But week 2, Cleveland, there should be double-digit favorites. And then again, week 3, Detroit. It's a talented defense. Probably the weak spot is those linebackers if they haven't developed as much as we think they can. But you need him for this brutal 5-6 week run, because every single team through October 12th, besides the Cleveland Browns, is probably a playoff team.
That's why you hope that what Ian Rappaport is saying does come to fruition, that he is ready or close to ready by the start of the season. We see him week 1, week 2, week 3, very early. It's not going to affect how the Ravens attacked preseason games. I think if Isaiah Likely was ever going to play in preseason game, it would be very sparingly. But aren't you glad at this point, if you're a Ravens fan, that the Ravens did not trade Mark Andrews? I know that there was some portion of the fan base. I think it was honestly just an outspoken minority of the fan base that wanted Mark Andrews gone after the way cut after the way things ended in Buffalo. And the front office continued to say publicly that this team was better with Mark Andrews than it was without him. That doesn't mean that they didn't shop him. That doesn't mean that they didn't try to trade him at some point or see what they could at least get for him. However, if you were to lose Isaiah Likely for a significant amount of time after you've cut or traded Mark Andrews, your tight end 1 being Charlie Kolar is not an ideal position to be in. This is a team that has a lot of weapons, but you need all those weapons and as many of those weapons on the field as possible to be a high-functioning offense. And from everything we've seen from Mark Andrews, nobody practices harder than Mark Andrews. The reports of his demise have been greatly exaggerated. I expect him to be another year removed from that injury that he suffered 2 years ago. I expect him to be a very productive player this season. So if the Ravens offense has to go without Isaiah Likely for a week or two to start the season, not great when you're going up against Buffalo. That's a team that, has a very good defense and you want to try to beat and take revenge. However, it should not massively impact the way that this offense functions. You do worry about it a little bit when you consider the fact that the last couple of years, the Ravens, especially on offense, have started a little bit slowly. Maybe that's because pretty much none of the starters play in the preseason and takes them a little bit more time to get their feet under them. However, I don't think that this should be a massive cause for concern. And like you said, Jonas, it is a major bummer for him personally, because he is looking to show that he can be a tight end 1 and hit the free agent market, and whether show that to the Ravens or show that to another team. The Twitter chatter of him yesterday, the timing of it was so ironic. There was Twitter chatter yesterday morning, yesterday early afternoon, that he was getting extended and that the contract that Ferguson signed would have set the market, and that would allow Isaiah Likely to get an extension. Ian Rappaport said they're not close. Right. There's really nothing to come of that. Given the fact that the Ravens did not extend Isaiah Likely within the last 5 months, I think tells us that they don't intend on extending him soon. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but I think it would kind of not mess with, but it would be a wrench to throw in the operation if you extend one guy while all 3 of your tight ends are barreling towards free agency. I'm not sure the Ravens want to be answering questions about why they didn't extend Mark Andrews, why they gave the contract to Isaiah Likely and not Mark Andrews at this point in the season. It could be a potential distraction.
Yeah, but you got to put, if you're Eric DeCosta, you put business first and you leave the locker room management to John Harbaugh and to those team leaders. I mean, I think there have been talks between, the Ravens and Isaiah, but I just don't know about how far apart they are, what the timing of that would be. So we'll see. They've gotten deals done in training camp before. They extended Broderick Washington a couple years ago. They, of course, got the deal done with Roquan Smith, not in training camp, but in the in the offseason or at the end of the season before the final stand for Patrick Queen, and that was a either or situation where either you're keeping Roquan or you're throwing money at PQ. And obviously they threw their money at Roquan. They let PQ go to Pittsburgh. But I think more than anything, this is just kind of a reality check for the Ravens and the Ravens fans. Like, this team really didn't have injury problems at all until probably the playoffs last year with Zay Flowers. They were by far the healthiest team in the NFL. If you look at, the FTN adjusted games lost statistic. And so far, what do we have? We have our Darius Washington going down with Achilles. We have Isaiah Likely probably missing a little bit of regular season time with this injury. So, regression is a nasty mistress sometimes. And I think it doesn't just come back in, how you play. It comes back in how that injury report shakes up. And everyone expecting the Ravens to have this kind of smooth sailing they did last year should steel themselves for more bad news. I don't know if it's going to come out during training camp. You hope that everyone, goes through camp pretty healthy. Everyone goes through the season pretty healthy. But this is a contact sport. Even in red zone one-on-ones, you can have a potentially career-altering injury. And I would just say that, this is something that every team around the NFL is already having to deal with, and some of them a lot worse than the Ravens. And just know that this kind of thing happens.
And this is partly why I agree very much so with the Ravens' preseason strategy of not playing their starters. I mean, how devastating would it be to lose a serious starter weeks before actual game action matters?
And not just started. I went back and looked at last year. They didn't even play Justice Hill.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just Lamar and Derek. It was just about everybody who they expected to contribute.
Right.
So, I understand them being incredibly cautious when it comes to the preseason. And sure, that may mean that they start a little bit slower than other teams. I'd rather have that than have one of your starters or one of your serious contributors go down with a injury that is going to knock them out for a long amount of time. Let's talk about some better news. Let's talk about some guys that have stuck out to us at training camp. And that's why our Who's Got It Better Than award is going to be handed out to one of these training camp stars, and that's wide receiver Devontez Walker. It is Tez breakout season. Jonas, this is a guy that we knew was going to take some work. We knew was going to take some development when he was taken in the 4th round out of UNC last year. He has the speed. He has the size. He has the ability to catch contested balls. Last year, he made only 1 catch during the regular season. It was a touchdown in a blowout win
on a trick play.
On a trick play over the Giants. This year, he has another obstacle placed in front of him. He has 3 legitimate wide receivers ahead of him on the depth chart, and the Ravens brought back Tylan Wallace. That makes him the 5th banana in this conversation. However, he has taken a step up from last year, at least in what we've seen between OTAs, minicamp, and now training camp. He is consistently making good plays out on the practice field.
Before we talk about the serious stuff, I gotta get something out of my head. Would the nickname or the costume Tez dispenser do anything for you?
I think there's something there.
Okay.
There's a kernel of something there.
Is it more of a sign than it is a nickname?
Probably.
Because he's not really dispensing anything.
Yeah.
He's receiving something.
He is receiving. I could probably mess around in Photoshop and see if I could make his head into a Pez dispenser.
Yeah, that's the easy part.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What's the hard part? Getting him to buy in?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Selling him our merch idea, not having any of our listeners steal it and copyright it, patent it before we do. But yeah, Tez has been dispensing a lot of highlights so far in camp. He's probably leading all the Ravens receivers in total targets, in total catches. I mean, you were there yesterday, saw him make a catch against Awuzie. You saw him make a catch against, I believe, Nate Wiggins. It wasn't as active a day as it was, I think, on Saturday when I believe he had 6 total catches. And again, some of this is caveated by the fact that he has been working part-time with the first team, part-time with the second team. So, some of those stats, you kind of grade them on a curve, but he's been impressive. He's you think of a guy who is as slender as he is, and you wonder about his ability to make like contested catches, but he's gone up for tough balls over the middle. He's been able to shield guys off. He's been able to make good catches. And I went back and looked at his UNC scouting report, and I was like, all right, this guy probably had a drop problem, or a contested catch problem. And no, I mean, even going back to his college days, he was good at that. It's just, the problem with him was, can he be more than a straight line vertical kind of receiver? And so far, he's been able to do, like I wrote for a story that's going up soon. He's been able to dabble in pretty much every type of catch that the Ravens have asked of him. I don't think you would expect him to be running the kind of shifty whip routes and everything where you're exploding laterally, but he just has that speed that sets up so much of the other parts of his game, and it's just been really impressive and fun to watch him develop, considering just how unforgettable he was in camp last year.
I know we are weeks away from them making final roster cuts and making roster decisions, but when you look at this wide receiver room, mention the 4 guys ahead of him: Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Tylan Wallace. I think we could all consider those guys locks. I think the only question for that 5th spot was, how impressive would LaJohntay Wester be, the 6th round pick by the Ravens this past year, in the return game, in the special teams game? Is he electric enough to unseat Devontez Walker? And if Devontez Walker doesn't take a step forward, is he going to steal that final spot and just be a special team specialist? At this point, we have seen very little from LaJohntay Wester on offense. He's undersized, so he has that working against him. And we just haven't seen a whole lot of him in the return game either. I have a very hard time imagining LaJohntay Wester beating out Devontez Walker for that final wide receiver spot on the roster.
Well, they could keep 6 and just have Wester be the dedicated return guy.
I just worry about how many roster spots they can truly dole out for a lot of these guys.
I agree. Wester has not been that impressive in camp. Sorry to all the Ravens fans who are in love with his highlights, but most of his catches have been kind of quick outs. Hasn't really worked that well over the middle. Again, maybe that's just him learning the offense. Maybe it's the shaky quarterback play that we'll get to in a little bit. But it's going to be interesting to see just how much the Ravens coaches trust Tez in the pecking order, because you mentioned the top 4, but Tylan Wallace has had kind of a quiet camp. I think he had a quiet camp last year and then a really impressive preseason, which set him up for the solid season that he had in 2024. But DeAndre Hopkins has made his highlights have been not really substantial. Like he's made impressive catches, but it seems like they've all come out of bounds. And how much does a near catch really do for you? And like, how much does, if you can't separate as reliably as, let's say, this new and improved Devontez Walker can, then what does that mean for what these guys are able to do during the regular season? DeAndre Hopkins is a good contested catch guy overall, but even last year, I think he was outside of the top 50 in like PFF's, wide receivers in contested catch rate. So if with another year that ability falls a little bit shorter, and maybe the deep speed isn't what it once was, even though obviously we've talked about him hitting a bunch of metrics that suggest he's running fast. I just wonder if there will be situations where the Ravens have three wide receivers on the field, and it's Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, and then Tez Walker on the field.
This is one of those instances where it is a zero-sum game when you're watching players play against their teammates. And we're watching so often DeAndre Hopkins go up against Nate Wiggins. And Jonas, you were a Nate Wiggins stan. And I wonder how much of DeAndre Hopkins' slow start to camp has been because Nate Wiggins is that guy.
Yeah.
Like, is Nate Wiggins just the shutdown corner that you imagine, that we all imagine he could be? It's very much a possibility.
Also, one kind of theoretical thing that I'm interested in. Are you familiar at all with the concept of the sacrificial X receiver?
Not really.
Okay. It has nothing to do with like sacrificing your body. I think it's something that I believe was quasi popularized by Matt Harmon, who works for Yahoo, does reception perception charting, a big wide receiver stats guy. Matt Collins in Buffalo last year, a different body prototype than Tez Walker. He's a little bit more filled out. He's a great run blocker. We don't really know what Tez can bring in that department. But part of what made Buffalo's offense so successful, throwing over the middle of the field, was they had Matt Collins just running vertical route after vertical route, trying to take the top off the defense, open up space, in between the hash marks, just make life easier for everyone, knowing that chances were he wasn't really going to get the ball that often. And you think of kind of what Devin Duvernay used to be for this Ravens offense. Just, you're fast, go run fast. Hopefully that'll help the other guys on this offense. maybe you'll get a touch, look every other quarter or something like that. And I wonder, because of Tez's speed and because of what the Ravens could do to open up space for everyone else, first of all, he has to win in press coverage. That's part of the deal of being a sacrificial X. But could he be a guy who sees a lot of time on this field just by being a guy who is like a wind-up toy? You just set him, have him running posts, having him running goes, having him running fades, knowing that it's going to be a lot of cardio for you, but ultimately it's going to lift this offense in ways that maybe, a Tylan Wallace couldn't, or DeAndre Hopkins couldn't from that outside exposition. So just something to kind of monitor.
The only thing that you worry about in that instance is he going to get the ball enough for the defense to respect him? Because if he doesn't get enough targets in that role, at a certain point, he's not going to get a whole lot of attention from the defense.
I guess, I don't know enough about how safeties are supposed to play it, but if you're playing as a deep safety and your rules are to keep the wide receiver in front of you, then if you're letting him get past you every single time, then you're probably playing with fire, especially considering how good Lamar was at throwing deep passes last year. But you're right. I mean, there were plenty of times with Miles Boykin and Devin Duvernay where the safeties weren't really caring about them because they were more focused about Mark Andrews running the dig in front of him, or Hollywood Brown running a slant over the middle.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about some other guys who have stuck out so far in training camp. And it starts with a pair of defensive backs, Jaylen Armour-Davis and a guy by the name of Ruben Lowery, who is new to camp. Let's start with Jaylen Armour-Davis. Missed practice on Tuesday after leaving Monday's practice early with an undisclosed injury. And John Harbaugh didn't really give an update other than there was an MRI being done. That's never good when they're having to do an MRI. And it stinks because this is a guy that I feel like most training camps has flashed at times. This year, they're trying him out at safety. He's already worked a lot at cornerback. This is a guy that was a early day 3 pick a few years ago, and somebody who has all the tools, has all the athleticism. And we've been waiting for him to take the jump into being a regular contributor, and it's injuries. And so for him to suffer yet another injury in training camp and to stymie his progression is a major bummer.
Yeah, you just hope that it's not too serious. I think it's been interesting to watch him move around the field in camp, because primarily he has been an outside cornerback for the Ravens, but he's been playing a lot more in the slot. There was an interesting play where I was kind of keeping track of him, where he lines up in the slot and then the ball is snapped and he kind of goes back into the deep half, just in an inverted cover 2, cover 4, whatever type of thing. That's obviously something the Ravens want to have in their arsenal, just the ability to move guys around, to fool the quarterback, have one cornerback or have one guy line up in a traditional spot, and then boom, the ball snapped and you're in a non-traditional spot, and it makes it a little bit tougher for the quarterback to figure out exactly who's where to go with the ball, that stuff. But if this is a serious injury, and hopefully we'll know more in a couple hours, then it really is tough for me to see that there being a spot for this guy, because he brings a lot of special teams, but he doesn't have at this point, the team-friendly rookie contract for the roster of a guy like Bilal Kone, who's also obviously dealing with a shoulder injury. Robert Longerbeam, neither of those guys has been as impressive as Jaylen Armour-Davis, but Jaylen Armour-Davis at this point really isn't in the mix for a starting job, but just a spot on this team at a position that is pretty snake bitten for the Ravens over the years. It's one of those greyhound positions that Eric DeCosta talks about, where guys break down pretty easily. And, unfortunately, no one knows that better than Jaylen Armour-Davis, who just has dealt with one thing after another over his career. But you're right. I mean, he's got the size to play in the slot. He's got the speed to go out wide. He's starting to get the experience to be able to play safety in a pinch, whether it's before the snap, after the snap. So hopefully he's out there pretty soon. Obviously, we're not even in August right now, so he does have a little bit of a grace period. But I would like to see him make the team, because he's just a great guy. He seems like a wonderful person to have in that locker room. But it's a business decision, and if the Ravens feel like the young guys are a better fit for this team, not just in the near future, the long future as well, then they're going to make that call.
One of those young guys is Ruben Lowery. You mentioned a bunch of the guys that the Ravens drafted within the last 2 drafts. Obviously, TJ Tampa taken with a high pick last year. And then this year, they doubled down on that greyhound position. Robert Longerbeam was taken in the 6th round. They have invested so much into that cornerback position that I don't think any of us were really looking that closely at some of the undrafted free agents that they brought in at the defensive backs. But perhaps we should have been, because Ruben Lowery has been making plays consistently during this camp. Played primarily in the slot and the box in college at Tennessee Chattanooga. He's got 2 interceptions at OTAs, and he is looking very good in training camp as well. I wonder if this guy can legitimately play safety, and if the Ravens believe he can play safety, if he can sneak his way onto the roster, because we've talked about the depth that the Ravens have at cornerback, not so much at safety behind those top 2 guys. The Ardarius Washington injury really hurt the depth at that position. We know the Ravens like to go with a lot of defensive backs on the field. I think my assumption was, all right, if their 2 top defensive back safeties are going to be Kyle Hamilton and Malachi Starks, maybe when the Ravens go with 6 defensive backs on the field, they'll just add an extra cornerback. You know, they already have Cheeto Awuzie. They have they brought in Jair Alexander. They'll just go really heavy on cornerback. But it would be nice if they could have a quality third safety. And when Ruben Lowery's biggest competition is Sanusi Kane and Bo Braid, I feel like that's a battle that is winnable.
Yeah, he's not a big guy, but neither is Bo Braid really. You know, he's Ruben Lowery's 5'9", 204 pounds. Obviously coming with this small school pedigree. Do you know what the nickname of Tennessee Chattanooga is?
The Lookouts?
The Mocs.
I'm thinking of the Chattanooga Lookouts, which is like a minor league baseball team.
Baseball. Interesting.
I think so, yeah.
Funny
how I brought that up, Jonas.
Their
what is it? The Mocs?
I'm guessing, I'm looking at their Wikipedia right now, their mascot is Scrappy the Mockingbird. So maybe Mockingbird is shortened to Mocs.
Sure.
Perhaps. Yeah, he's you know, had a louder first week of camp than he did a louder first week of camp than he has the past couple of days. But still, you know, been solid, been lining up a lot in the slot. Obviously that's where he played primarily at Tennessee Chattanooga. Got snaps in the box as well. You know, it's boring to say it over and over again, but at this point, the guys on the back end of the roster have to be making the team either with insane coverage ability and or reliable special teams ability. So that is part of the challenge for Chris Horton. That's part of the challenge for John Harbaugh, just developing these guys, seeing what they can do in these 3 preseason games. Because if you can, you know, be a gunner, be a vice, you know, do whatever you have to on these special teams jobs, and show that you have the willingness to learn, show that you have the ability to hold up physically against guys who are probably bigger and stronger than you, then certainly you've got a shot. Obviously, I think my expectation is that none of the undrafted rookies make this team, which is obviously
that would end a streak, right?
Well, the streak broke a couple years ago,
okay,
but that is a point of pride for the Ravens. But I would much rather have, you know, draft capital making the team than undrafted rookies. And
when you draft 11 guys,
yeah, it's tough to make it. So you know, maybe he's a practice squad guy who finds his way onto the roster because of injuries or what have you. But he's definitely a guy who, with kind of his shorter frame, his nose for the ball, could be a guy who really develops into a little bit of a folk hero these next couple of weeks.
Undrafted guys not making the roster. Ravens not winning every single preseason game they play. Are these even the Ravens anymore?
What happened to the team we covered?
What happened to the team that we covered? All right. 2 more guys that we should talk about here. Let's talk about David Ojabo. 12th consecutive camp we are here talking about David Ojabo and trying to dissect everything that we see from him in offseason practices. When you look at David Ojabo and his potential of making this roster, the fact that he is on the bubble, the fact that he is going up against former 3rd-round pick Adisa Isaac, who is taken with a day 2 pick, who is flashed so much athleticism at Penn State and hopefully has overcome the injury issues that he suffered in his first year in the NFL. What are you seeing out of David Ojabo? Is he flashing enough athleticism? Is he taking enough of a step? And is there anything in camp that is going to convince you that he can actually translate his athleticism, his burst, his power into game action?
Yeah, I mean, there haven't really been any dominant pass rush days for any first stringers on defense since the pads came on. So I think Ojabo has looked more athletic. He's looked more explosive. I think Adisa Isaac is making the team regardless. So you just hope that he's a guy who, if you're treating year 2 as year 1 because of what he had to deal with in year 1 with all those hamstring injuries, then I don't think you're prepared to move on from a guy like that, even though, especially because you took him in the third round. So that's 5 outside linebackers total, and it just, does David Ojabo, is he high enough on that pass rush pecking order that you would keep him as a 6th outside linebacker? Can he contribute on special teams? Can he contribute against the run? We talked about him getting pancaked by Pat Ricard on that first day, but it seems like otherwise he's been pretty solid. You see him out there. He has that big frame, like it's notably bigger than Mike Green, and Mike Green is holding up decently against the run early. So, it's not anything crazy to say that the preseason is going to be big for him. He had some flashes, I think, in that preseason game against the Falcons last year, which built on a strong week of practice for him. So if he goes out there with his hair on fire and he's being able to kind of, turn that corner like he was able to do so reliably at Michigan, then it's going to be tough for the Ravens to say, we don't want you on our team, because they don't want to see a guy who they invested so much draft capital in ending up on a team that needs an edge rusher, and maybe he ends up making a difference for one of these guys. So I still don't know where I'd probably say it's more likely than not that he doesn't make the team because of just how many other roster needs there are. But it's encouraging that he looks athletic. He looks a little bit more like his old self. Now he just needs to, get better technically, continue to stack days, and most importantly, stay healthy.
I worry about him, and this is probably a concern of the Ravens front office and Eric DeCosta. Is David Ojabo going to be just a second contract guy? Is he just going to pop with another team or the Ravens? Maybe they bring him back on his second deal in the NFL. Like, I could very much see him heading into free agency next March and some team saying, let's throw a 1 year, $10 million at him. And then he pops off in a very limited role. I think Chuck Smith is going to get the most out of guys, but maybe this is an instance where a change of scenery might help, or he gets in the right room with the right guys and just is able to make it pop. And then all of a sudden, well, there goes a guy that you drafted and just could never see that from on the field. One more guy that we should talk about. Talk about John Hoyland. We knew that this was a competition between him and Tyler Loop coming into camp at the kicking battle. We knew that the Ravens wanted Tyler Loop to win this battle. But so far, after a very good start to camp from Tyler Loop, John Hoyland is making a little bit of a case for himself, isn't he, Jonas?
Doesn't have a lot of hair, but he does have a leg. Friends are going to freak out when they see him like in a one shot for the first time in a preseason game. Like, that guy's an undrafted rookie. Not to hair shame anyone, but
he looks older. He certainly looks older than he is.
It's a very polite way of saying it.
And it's funny because Tyler Loop looks younger than he is. Yes. Tyler Loop looks like a babe in swaddling clothes. Yeah. I mean, he is a young looking guy out there.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we are keeping the stats throughout camp. We try to provide as much context as we can for these running totals. Tyler Loop, 28 for 31 so far, which I think is about 90.2%. I think I did the math last night. John Hoyland, 25 for 28. So both of them have missed 3 kicks. John Hoyland obviously does not have the leg that Tyler Loop has, and that is reflected in the types of kicks that they're asking him to make. I think yesterday the 51-yarder that he took was the first time that I can remember the Ravens asking him to make a kick from even more than 45 yards. He did not make that one. But he's done a good job of, kicking a straight ball. That's something that the Ravens want to see. Just, can you kick a straight ball? So it's obviously a pretty easy training camp battle for us to follow because it's just straight up numbers. But I wonder how much the preseason will matter. Like, it's not like these guys are going to be getting 2 kicks every quarter. Chris Horton told us that both these guys will be kicking in the preseason, but I think the hope is that the Ravens have this training camp competition decided by that finale. So, I don't know if you're the Ravens and you want to not make this controversy and you feel like Tyler Loop is kicking well enough that you give Hoyland 3/4 of the reps here and Tyler Loop 1/4 of the reps in the preseason, so that maybe you can juice the value for John Hoyland if you're really believing that he could be a piece for someone, and also doing what you can to keep some heat off Tyler Loop if him only getting 1 kick a game is what it's going to take to be able to convince the public that this is the right guy for the job. I don't know. There's just a whole lot of dynamics in play that are going to be fascinating with how the Ravens attack not just these training camp snaps, but also just the preseason role assignments.
It is the easiest for us to follow because we're just looking at, is the guy making kicks or isn't he? Which guy is making more kicks? But at the same time, not all kicks are created equal, obviously.
Yeah, and we're also, one of the, I wasn't watching this, but one of the Tyler Loop misses on Monday when he had that was the first time he missed any kicks at all in camp, went 5 for 8 overall, was apparently a bad snap for him. And that is something that us just watching from the surface level on the sideline do not always pick up. Maybe it looks like it's online, but it's a little bit here. And Jordan Stout does a good job of putting it there, but it doesn't get all the laces around. So that's why these guys have the GoPros on. That's why they have Randy Brown and watching every single rep so that they can give a little bit more context to make that final decision about who's going to be kicker one for us.
I think you and I should both wear GoPros at training camp. We should both wear hats. If you haven't seen the pictures or images from camp, the kickers are wearing the helmets with a GoPro attached.
I think it might just be Hoyland.
Okay, just Hoyland, not Tyler Loop, which is an interesting dichotomy there. Why Hoyland is wearing the GoPro and Tyler Loop isn't. But maybe Loop will at some point.
Yeah.
I think we should do that. If all things are equal, if it's even close, I think the Ravens would just like to give that job to Tyler Loop. I think if they get to that finale and things are pretty much coming out equal, tie goes to the drafted guy in Tyler Loop. All right, let's talk about what we've heard from a couple leaders on this defense. In particular, Marlon Humphrey, who appears to be already asking Michael Phelps to come to Ravens training camp and help the Ravens learn how to swim. Saw that on social media yesterday.
Yep.
Interesting. When do we get access to that pool, Jonas?
I don't think the banner will ever have access to that pool.
I don't think any reporters will have access to that pool. Marlon Humphrey, what he is saying and doing on the field, and this goes back to minicamp. This goes back to OTAs. This is very much a point of emphasis for Marlon Humphrey this year. This is a guy who has been with this defense for a long time, former first-round pick. He has seen the field, shared the field with some Ravens legends, and he's seen several defensive coordinators at the helm, a lot of different guys next to him. And what he is talked about consistently is wanting to bring back the toughness, the reputation of the Ravens defense. He wants to set the standard very high. He wants to bring a certain kind of attention to detail, a certain kind of attitude. He is having these 6 a.m. workouts where they are going into the facility at 5:59 and they are lifting weights for a long time. He's seeing Jair Alexander. He's seeing a group of other guys in there with him. Jair Alexander is blasting music on a boombox. Yeah. And if you don't make it at that 6 o'clock deadline, if you're not there by 5:59, you're not going to make that lift. It's attention to detail that Marlon Humphrey is really honing in on. I think it's admirable. This is a guy who, throughout his career, has always had talent on the field. But sometimes there are question marks about the goofiness, the silliness that he has. You see it on social media. You see it with his former podcast. You see it everywhere else. It seems like Marlon Humphrey really noticed last year that, and he won't come out and say this because I don't think he wants to throw anybody under the bus, that there was perhaps a little bit of a leadership void last year. They lose Mike McDonald. They lost a lot of the veterans in that room. They lost Jadeveon Clowney. They lose Geno Stone. They lose Ronald Darby. They lose Patrick Queen. A lot of turnover on the defensive side of the ball from last year, from 2023 to 2024. I think he wants to bring some of that back. And I think he realizes that he needs to be a bigger voice in that room. Roquan Smith is already a pretty big voice, but you no longer have Marcus Williams. You no longer have some of those guys that you were expecting to be there. And I think Marlon Humphrey is doing his darndest to raise the standard and raise the level of play on that side of the ball.
Yeah, he was, when I was working at the Sun, I did a story on basically this, breakfast club, leadership council, whatever you want to call it, group of guys, and he was among the guys, part of that group. That was Tony Jefferson, Eric Weddle, some of the long in the tooth veterans who were on that, I think 2018, 2019 team who would get up early in the morning. By the way, have you ever dabbled in morning workouts, whether it's runs or lifts or anything like that?
Jonas, what do you think?
That's why I added runs and not as well as lifts.
What do you think? I'll get up early and play some basketball at times.
Okay.
I'm not a big runner.
I remember one time when I was working, I had become accustomed to working late at night, especially early in my career. But one time I was asked to help out at the Sun's emerging news desk, which started at 7 o'clock, and that meant that my usual late night workouts would not be possible because I'd be going to bed pretty early. So I decided to go to the gym at like 3:30 or something.
Ooh,
It was fine, but
3:30 in the morning?
yeah, what people said about that workout kind of carrying through the rest of the day and just really giving you some pep in your step did not work for me. But by like 10 or 11 a.m., I was dragging. So these guys, to do that, to get up, I mean, Marlon has a kid. I wonder if he's beating his kid to these wake up calls.
Yeah, kids wake up awfully
a very,
early.
very young kid. So for these guys to be putting in the work, I mean, I think, I randomly was thinking about just like all these narratives about Cam Ward being the first one in the building at the Titans facility. Like, it doesn't really matter if you're the first one, and it matters how long you're working and how productively you're working for. So we shouldn't really glorify these guys who are doing morning lifts if they're doing morning lifts so they can get out of afternoon lifts. You know what I mean? Like, if you have to work out once every day, we shouldn't really be glorifying guys for when they do it. Obviously, it's a cool team building exercise. It's a cool narrative that these guys are bonding together over these early morning sessions. But I would much rather just do what I have to, do what I'm comfortable with, get productive, be productive that way. But he has gotten married in the past year. He's had a kid. He's obviously coming up on 30 and probably seen the end on the horizon. I think he's talked about not wanting to really play out the string for too long as a guy. He's obviously has the championship pedigree at Alabama and wanting to bring that to Baltimore. I think he talked on the Mina Kimes podcast, which came out yesterday, but I think was recorded a couple weeks ago, just about how long that loss to the Bills lingered for him and just how much it stunk to have everything clicking for you. It seemed like with the offense, the defense, even Justin Tucker was coming around as a kicker, and then not even be able to make it to the AFC Championship game. So, I think he probably realizes that the Ravens, compared to a lot of team Super Bowl windows, have a pretty extended one because of what this front office has, because of the young talent on this team. But he's probably pretty sick and tired of not being able to make it to February with this team still standing. So I still think this is more Roquan's defense and maybe even more Kyle's defense than anyone else's defense because of just what they are to the spine of this group and how important communication is with everyone else. But he's been incredible in camp. Like, I wrote for the story that'll go up today about just camp standouts. Like, we talk about Nate Wiggins' impressive camp. We talk about Jair Alexander's impressive camp. But what's also impressive is just defending so well that you don't get targeted. And Marlon Humphrey is not getting targeted. And the times that he is getting targeted, he's in position to make plays and get hands on the ball. And we shouldn't, deify these guys who are getting targeted, because the best cornerbacks, are shut down cornerbacks. And, it's Revis Island. It's Sauce, during his first year with the Jets, it's just not even giving quarterbacks the idea that this guy's going to be open on a given play. So he's had a great camp. Seems like he's doing well as a locker room guy, team leader guy. But, this defense, like you said, probably needs more tone setters, and it seems like he's bringing that to the Ravens.
And now that you mentioned Kyle Hamilton, now that Kyle Hamilton is in, later on in his career, this is what is going to be his fourth year. He certainly is in a position where he can take more of a vocal role. And I would imagine teammates saw what he did last year, putting the team first, going from this kind of jack of all trades who can do everything and a Swiss Army knife, and taking more of a traditional safety role because that's what the defense needed at that point. I would think his teammates would see that and be impressed with it and understand that that's a team first guy. Kyle Hamilton is also a quieter guy, and Marlon Humphrey is not quiet. I think Kyle Hamilton is okay with kind of ceding that vocalness to Marlon Humphrey or to other teammates. Hamilton seems to me more like a show it on the field and do less talking off the field. And Marlon Humphrey talks off the field. He talks on the field. He is a loud guy.
Yeah, I think on the field though, he's probably more of a talk with his pads kind of guy, like Roquan.
Humphrey.
Yeah. Like Kyle Hamilton. That actually kind of leads me into a quick discussion I wanted to have with you. Just what do we think is the value of an energy guy like Jair Alexander? Like, if he does become this starting cornerback, if he is on the field for 50, 75, 90% of the snaps, and he is celebrating with these seatbelt celebrations. Do we think that is doing anything for anyone but himself, or can it have this effect on the rest of the defense? Because I think of 2023, like there weren't a lot of boisterous guys on that defense. Like, it was Roquan, it was Kyle Hamilton, it was Patrick Queen, Jadeveon Clowney played with a bit of an edge, but there wasn't a guy who was as exuberant, I guess we can put it, as Jair Alexander, and still that was, up there with the Browns as clearly the best two defenses in the NFL. So I just kind of wonder, in a sport like the NFL, where there's so many discrete plays and stops and starts, it's not like, Steph Curry giving you the bye-bye during a game and that rubs off on everyone that he's playing with. Like, I wonder, from a big picture, holistic perspective, is it just a fun little thing for training camp highlights, or is there an actual energy that a guy can bring to a sport with as many stops and starts as football?
I can't say definitively. I don't know if we really know. And I think it'll bear itself out. I think you can really only talk the talk if you've walked the walk. Jair Alexander has had a great career so far, but he has to bring it over here and do it here. I think that if this defense is going poorly and he is still being as boisterous and loud as we've seen him be during training camp, that might not go over as well as if he is returning to his all-pro form and being a shutdown cornerback. Zay Flowers said the other day he's perhaps the most confident defensive back that he's ever seen, that he's ever played against. And that kind of confidence can be infectious. I think we'll see. I think we'll see exactly what kind of role that is. And I look at last year's defense compared to this one. We talked about 2023 defense being, that was the gold standard. You had a supreme defensive coordinator. You had so much talent that you were able to cultivate on that side of the ball. Last year, they took a massive step back, in large part because they lost a lot of talent. But it wasn't just the talent that was the issue. I think that there were still a lot of talented pieces on that defense that are still here right now. Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton and Odafe Owe and Kyle Van Noy, Michael Pierce and Tavius Robinson. There was enough talent on that defense to be an elite unit. But for the first half of the season, first 2/3 of the season, they weren't. And I'm not sure what the combination was that wasn't working. I think a large part of it was the fact that Zach Orr had never been a defensive coordinator before. I think part of it was Marcus Williams kind of fell off a cliff. But there might have been something under the surface that was going on that we weren't aware of. And to see that they are all now recognizing that there was an issue and trying to correct that issue, I think goes a long way. And guys do it in different ways. Kyle Hamilton is going to be a quieter guy. Jair Alexander is going to be a loud guy. Marlon Humphrey is going to be Marlon Humphrey. But so long as this unit comes together and gels, I think that is by far the most important thing. And the fact that Zach Orr has a firmer grasp on this job, and it seems like he is, the Ravens feel better about the assistants around him in particular. I think that this is a defense that has all the earmarks of a unit that should improve.
Yeah, I mean, you just think about the guys who you would describe as good players to great players in the starting secondary. We know that I think there are probably few slam dunk all pro picks like Kyle Hamilton at safety is going to be every year that he's healthy. Marlon Humphrey coming off an all pro season himself. He can play in the slot, can play out wide. Nate Wiggins seems like he's taken a step, hasn't really lost any kind of step with that added weight gain. So that's three guys who we know have been at least pretty good in recent memory. And then Malachi Starks, can he be as impactful as our Darius Washington was last year? We think so. He's certainly more physically gifted from a size, speed, weight perspective. That it seems like he's already had a nice bit of synergy with Kyle Hamilton at the back there. So you're just really saying we have four guys who we believe can be at the minimum pretty good, and it just comes down to, can you get a fifth guy or maybe even a sixth guy to fill that out? Because you're only as good as your weakest point. And last year the Ravens' weak point was Brandon Stevens, and quarterbacks like Joe Burrow went at him over and over and over again. And I think the Ravens, from what we've seen with Jair Alexander stepping up, Cheeto Woozy being a guy who is, again, not being targeted very often when he's been healthy, and then TJ Tampa, probably I think pretty clearly the third candidate for that starting position, but he's been able to have some good reps here and there. So I think they have to be feeling pretty good about where that secondary is, especially with how bad last year started.
We talked, I think, last week about how many storylines during training camp, during offseason workouts get forgotten about over the course of the season. I wonder if this is one of those instances where if the Ravens, this is a huge jinx that I'm about to throw out there, but if the Ravens go on a postseason run, if they make it to the Super Bowl, this could be a moment where we look back at Marlon Humphrey, what he says, how he acts during the offseason, the fact that he's having these 6 a.m. workouts, the fact that he wants to bring back that tenacity, that run through a brick wallness of the Ravens defense. And we point back to that as a watershed moment for the defense, a watershed moment for this team. It's just one of those moments that maybe we'll forget about. If this team underperforms, we'll look back and say, well, that was a whole lot of wasted words. However, if they make it far, we can point back to this as a moment where the culture changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the culture, I don't know if it's ever been an issue. Like,
No.
I mean, even last year, Marcus Williams, to his credit, when he went on the podcast with Teron Armstead last week or whenever that was, he didn't throw anyone under the bus. He was expressing belief in himself. He was expressing some frustration with how the Ravens coaches were communicating with him about either his job or why he lost his job or all that kind of stuff. But, to his credit, he was comfortable enough in that locker room, in that DB's room, that he never blabbed. He never spouted off on Twitter. He never went on Instagram Live and said he was unhappy. So I think the Ravens, even last year when things were bad, Kyle Hamilton was willing to talk to us. Marlon Humphrey occasionally was willing to talk to us. Nate Wiggins was usually pretty available. So I don't think it's really been a culture problem. It's probably been more so a coaching problem, not at the head coaching level, but certainly who he's hired has mattered. And last year the Ravens hired a new inside linebackers coach and they hired a new DBs coach, and now they have a new guy at both those spots because clearly John Harbaugh didn't think they were up to snuff. So you forget about those little invisible details until you're reminded of just how important they are. You don't really recognize the value of someone like Mike Macdonald until he leaves. And then you it's only in retrospect that you have the appreciation for what these guys are able to do as coaches, as communicators, as strategists.
Absolutely. All right, that just about does it for the Bane of Ravens podcast this week. We are going to be back at some point next week, I would think. The Ravens' first preseason game is August 7th.
Thursday.
That is next Thursday night. Cannot wait to cover that at M&T Bank Stadium.
I hope Anthony Richardson plays. It seems like he's been having an incredible camp for
finally healthy,
despite everything that he's going through.
Yeah, finally healthy. If he can't beat out Daniel Jones,
I know.
I have serious concerns about his NFL viability. But it should be a fun game, whether or not we see the Ravens starters.
Can you imagine the athletic contrast in the potential starting quarterbacks of Anthony Richardson on the Colts side and Cooper Rush? God bless him.
There was a play.
On the Ravens side.
There was a play yesterday where Lamar Jackson took off down the sideline and made it all the way to the end zone and flipped into the end zone, and it was just a lovely display of his athleticism. And then the next play, Cooper Rush comes in, and I turn to Sam Cohn of the Baltimore Sun, and I say, watch, Cooper's going to do the same thing right here. Didn't happen.
Yeah, I wrote a little bit about Cooper in the story that should be up pretty soon, but so much of athleticism, I think, for quarterbacks now is expressed in what you're able to do with off-platform throws. And there was a play that's I think Cooper Rush, you were there. He, by and large, had a pretty solid day.
Sure.
He was hitting some guys downfield. But there was a play where it's like a wide receiver screen to DeAndre Hopkins. I forget if it was a messy snap or a crowded pocket or whatever, but basically Cooper Rush couldn't get his feet set. And so that asked him to make a 10-yard throw to his right without generating the power from his base. And so you're throwing basically from the belly button up, and he couldn't get it there. It was either a completion right at the ground, and DeAndre Hopkins was ruled down pretty quickly, or was ruled incomplete. I didn't really get a close picture, but if you're not able to make those kind of out of structure throws because you just don't have the arm talent, that's where we get a little bit worried.
That wasn't the only play like that. I saw that happen a few times with Cooper Rush. Things have to go very well for him in the pocket.
Yeah.
In terms of wide receivers getting open. I saw him. There were even a couple completions where somebody's crossing over the middle and he doesn't really hit the receiver in stride. The receiver has to kind of sit down where he is. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. The fans will get a look at it during the preseason, and we'll get their thoughts. Thanks so much for tuning in. Subscribe to the Baltimore Banner, $1 for 6 months, and subscribe to the Banner Ravens podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. And write us a 5-star review. We'll read it out here on the show. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.